Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Rachel Reeves has played an absolute blinder. Unfortunately, it's not for the UK. China has been buying up Britain's private schools after they found themselves in financial difficulty. It has been suggested that Labour's introduction of VAT on private school fees, which has been championed by Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson, with the responsibility for the government's fiscal policies ultimately lying at the Chancellor's door, has increased their attractiveness to Chinese investors. Officials are of the belief that the Chinese Communist Party is responsible for a spike in takeovers of independent UK schools of late, as more than 30 have been purchased by investors from the Asian country. These include Thetford Grammar School, which was founded in 1566 and now owned by China Financial Services Holdings, and Wisbech Grammar, which was founded in 1379 and has been bought by Access Education. Feeling uneasy about this is not just a xenophobic reflex, but a genuine strategic consideration, as Vladimir Putin's strengthening relationships with China, as well as Iran and North Korea, constitutes a growing threat to Western security. The Institute for the Study of War, ISDO, has stipulated, as Russia is actively pursuing a global anti-Western alliance. China is also, of course, taking its own actions, including purportedly supplying the Houthis with aid, in return for safe passage for its ships through the Red Sea. Julian Fisher, a former teacher at Harrow Beijing and co-founder and consultant at Venture Education, which empowers education in China, has told The Times the country knows that with the changes to VAT, a lot more schools, likely to be slightly better schools, will become available. A senior government source told the newspaper that China is playing the long game and doing what the UK used to do in its imperial territories, namely seeking to influence young people. This is ideological warfare, they added, and children will grow up and be helpful to Xi Jinping and the party he dominates. China is actively attempting to go against the expansion of Western-led multilateral institutions such as NATO and AUKUS, while emphasizing the expansion of Sino-Russian-led institutions such as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO, and BRICS, specialists highlight. Ambitions are not limited to Earth, as Moscow and Beijing's willingness to deepen bilateral strategic ties has stretched to posturing against the West in space, the ISDO reports. It added in a recent report, the PRC portrays itself as a defender of the international legal order, but in reality wishes to reshape it in its own favor. It does so by claiming to be a champion of the Global South, a broad group of developing countries that Beijing says are unfairly marginalized by wealthy Western nations. It comes as Chinese influence in Britain's universities has also sparked concern, with UK-China Transparency, UKCT, publishing a report earlier this month describing widespread concerns within the academic community about spying, intimidation, harassment, and self-censorship. Professor Gregory Lee, Professor Emeritus at the University of St Andrews, expressed concern about censorship and academic constraints surrounding China-focused and Chinese studies in Britain. He added, "By not taking action on such issues, we in the UK are complicit in the Chinese authorities' efforts to have their own idyllic vision of China dominate the minds of students and non-students alike." The Conservative government finally took action against Huawei, as it promised that all equipment from the Chinese firm was to be removed from 5G networks by end of 2027. This followed updated technical advice from British cyber experts. More recently, it has been suggested that the mooted site of China's new London embassy, the Royal Mint Court, could enable the country to infiltrate the UK's financial system by tapping into fiber optic cables carrying sensitive data for City of London firms. This would amount to leaving your house key with the friendly neighborhood burglar. The latest development in this saga, which belongs in a budget spy movie or an episode of Doctor Who, is that parts of China's plans for the building have been blanked out. Rightly, Angela Rayner has asked why this is the case. All this is not mentioning the appalling treatment of Hong Kong after it was left in the care of China in 1997, and Wild West-style bounties on individuals who have left the territory to the UK. Amnesty International reported in 2024 that Chinese students in Britain, as well as other parts of Europe and North America, face intimidation and surveillance from Chinese and Hong Kong authorities. This month, the potential acquisition of the Telegraph Media Group by investment firm Redbird Capital has sparked concern in light of the firm's reported ties to China. Next, Two examples illustrate the scale of what is unfolding. Thetford Grammar School in Norfolk, founded in 1566 and steeped in Tudor history, is now owned by China Financial Services Holdings. Wisbech Grammar in Cambridgeshire, established in 1379, has been purchased by Access Education, another Chinese-backed investor. Institutions that once produced the administrators of empire and the officers of Britain's armed forces are now controlled by entities with ties to a very different kind of empire, one being built by Beijing through finance, technology, and ideology. Julian Fisher, co-founder of Venture Education and a former teacher at Harrow Beijing, told The Times that Chinese investors know exactly what they are doing. With the changes to VAT, a lot more schools, likely to be slightly better schools, will become available, he explained. In other words, Reeves' policy has made prestigious institutions, the very schools with brand value, history, and influence, available at a discount to those with the capital to seize them. For some, unease about Chinese ownership of British schools might sound like paranoia or even xenophobia. But as one senior government source told the newspaper, China is playing the long game, doing exactly what Britain itself once did in its colonial heyday, win influence by shaping the minds of the young. This is not simply about business transactions. This is, in the words of the source, ideological warfare. A child educated at a school owned by a Chinese corporation might never be told directly what to think about Xi Jinping or the Chinese Communist Party. But subtle changes in curriculum, staffing, and cultural exchange programs can have profound long-term effects. A generation raised with greater sympathy toward Beijing may one day be helpful to Chinese strategic aims, and those aims are becoming clearer by the day. Beijing is tightening its partnerships with Moscow, Tehran, and Pyongyang, a bloc that the Institute for the Study of War, ISDO, describes as a growing threat to Western security. China provides diplomatic and economic cover for Russia's war in Ukraine, material support to Iran's proxies, and aid to Yemen's Houthis in exchange for safe passage of Chinese shipping through the Red Sea. For Britain, which once styled itself as the guardian of global trade routes, this is not an academic concern. It is the realignment of the world order. China has been assiduous in presenting itself as the champion of the so-called Global South, the developing nations who resent Western dominance of global institutions. Through the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO, and the Brices grouping, Beijing promotes alternatives to NATO, AUKUS, and the Bretton Woods financial institutions. In space, China and Russia are deepening ties, presenting a united front against Western exploration and defense initiatives. The ISDO captured it starkly in a recent report. The PRC portrays itself as a defender of the international legal order, but in reality wishes to reshape it in its own favor. Education is part of that reshaping. Control of British schools is not about fees or profit margins. It is about embedding Beijing's influence in Western societies from the ground up. When China buys a school, it buys not just bricks and mortar, but also reputational capital, heritage, and access to networks of Britain's future elite. Concerns about China's reach are not limited to schools. Universities, too, are under pressure. A report by UK-China Transparency, UKCT, this month highlighted widespread concerns within the academic community about spying, intimidation, harassment, and self-censorship. Professor Gregory Lee, emeritus at the University of St Andrews, warned that Britain's failure to act allows Chinese authorities to dominate the intellectual landscape. By not taking action on such issues, we in the UK are complicit in the Chinese authorities' efforts to have their own idyllic vision of China dominate the minds of students and non-students alike, he said. Chinese students in Britain, according to Amnesty International, face surveillance and intimidation from authorities loyal to Beijing or Hong Kong. Some are pressured to report on their peers. Others fear for their families back home if they speak critically. The chilling effect is real, and it is growing. Britain has faced this dilemma before. For years, Huawei was integrated into the UK's 5G network, despite warnings from cyber experts. Only after intense pressure from allies, particularly the United States, did London pledge to remove all Huawei equipment by 2027. By then, the company had already gained a foothold in Britain's infrastructure. A similar mistake may be repeating itself with schools. Once an institution is in Chinese hands, unwinding that ownership is politically, legally, and financially complex. Reeves' fiscal policy has accelerated the sales without any safeguard against who the buyers might be. Nowhere is the risk more obvious than in London, where China has proposed building its new embassy on the site of the Royal Mint Court. Cybersecurity experts have warned that the location could allow Beijing to tap into fiber optic cables carrying sensitive financial data from the City of London. The prospect of granting China such access is, as one critic put it, like leaving your house key with the neighborhood burglar. Yet parts of China's embassy plans have been mysteriously redacted, prompting Labour's deputy leader Angela Rayner to demand answers. Transparency is lacking and suspicion grows. All this comes against the backdrop of Beijing's betrayal of Hong Kong. When Britain handed the territory back in 1997, it did so under the promise of one country, two systems. That promise has been shredded. Democratic institutions have been crushed, dissent criminalized, and bounties issued on activists who fled abroad, including to Britain. For Hong Kong exiles in London or Manchester, Chinese investment in British schools and universities is not an abstract policy debate. It is part of the same apparatus of control and intimidation that has already transformed their homeland. Even the British press is not immune. The potential acquisition of the Telegraph Media Group by Redbird Capital has raised eyebrows because of the firm's reported ties to China. A free and independent press is one of Britain's last lines of defense against foreign influence. If ownership is compromised, editorial independence may be next. All of which brings us back to Rachel Reeves. The Chancellor may have seen VAT on private school fees as a way to raise money and level the playing field. But by failing to anticipate the unintended consequences, she has effectively opened the gates of Britain's most prestigious institutions to foreign control. This is not simply an economic story, it is a geopolitical one. Education policy has become national security policy, and Reeves may have handed China a victory without firing a shot. For Beijing, it is a masterstroke. For Britain, it may yet prove a strategic blunder of historic proportions. The government faces hard questions. Should restrictions be placed on foreign ownership of schools, as there are for critical infrastructure? Should due diligence processes be tightened to prevent institutions with strategic significance falling into the hands of hostile states? And above all, should short-term fiscal policy be allowed to dictate long-term security strategy? Don't miss the latest updates on UK politics and global power plays. Hit like, subscribe, and stay informed.